Thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. This week I have a returning guest. Matthew Mather is with me on this week's show, and I'm pretty excited to have him back on because the last time I talked to Matthew was just about the time that Darknet was about to release, and that book has gone on to do phenomenally well, and now he has a new release called Nomad. That everybody's really excited about it, including me. Welcome to the show, Matthew.
Hey, Hank. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to have you. The last time we talked, it was around the end of the year last year, and Darknet was just about to come out, I believe, or it may have just newly released. But anyway, I read that book, or actually listened to the audiobook. The audio is phenomenal. And that book scared the crap out of me. Where did you get the idea for that book?
Oh, well, I actually started out my career, I studied electrical engineering, and then I did a little bit of postgraduate work at a place called the McGill Center for Intelligent Machines, which is a research center at McGill University, which in artificial intelligence. So I actually worked in the field of, I did two things. I worked in doing shape memory alloys, but also worked in, which is micro actuators for robotics, but I also did work in machine vision, so foveated vision, this is back, 25 years ago, so things have obviously advanced a lot. But I think one of my pet peeves in the last 25 years of reading science fiction and watching it is the science fiction movie you had the evolution of this AI, but then the AI was just basically like a super intelligent human. And I just said, when we have the first things that are AIs, they're not going to be like people, but they're going to be something else. And so I wanted to write Darknet to kind of, it's a book about an AI run amok, but it's not a book about an AI that suddenly becomes like a superhuman person AI. It's about what I envisioned as what an AI might look like, and how it might behave, and how it might be difficult to understand what exactly it is doing, because it wouldn't behave like a person. Like, it wouldn't have the same herd instincts and desire to dominate, like dominating the herd is kind of a human aspect. Would an AI have that need? Why would it, unless somebody programmed it into it? So, there's a lot of stuff that I wanted to try and, to talk about there.
Does it ever shock you when you just, you're sitting around, you're just dreaming up scenarios, and then you watch the news, or you read these tech articles, and the things that you envision start coming to pass?
Well, yeah, yes and no. The funny thing is that I've actually had, and I used the Bridgewater as kind of the, and other big hedge funds as sort of the model for the fictional Blue Bridge Corporation, which is in Darknet. But the scary thing that was right when the book was published, actually the guy that was behind Watson was hired by Bridgewater, and they're actually starting their own artificial intelligence program in the hedge fund, which is actually frightening, because it was exactly the scenario of the book, and I didn't plan it like that. So. And I actually talked to people. I've actually had people from Bridgewater email me anonymously, because it's a very, very closed-in kind of society. But they've said that the book actually is scarily accurate in its portrayal, and to the extent that people weren't even willing to let me talk about specific things because they didn't want to have it traced back to them, which kind of real life. So it actually. It is kind of a scary book, and I think, obviously there's parts in there fictional. The parts that are not fictional, like autonomous corporations, these are things that already exist and are operating, independently on the net already. And, the rise of artificial intelligence, everybody's got an AI in their pocket now, or, every company's got their own, so it's coming. And soon we're going to have AIs, autonomous robots running around on the streets, driving us around in cars, so. It's all coming.
Well, and one of the I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say that one of the devices in the book is that this AI, uh, you've got these chats going on with humans, and the humans can't tell that they're talking to an AI. Have you seen some of that actually taking place?
Yeah, I mean, there's already been, the Turing test was, the famous thing, and that's been, talked about a lot in film and in books. But we've already, the original Turing test that Turing had envisioned, we've already surpassed that. There has been, incidents or isolated sort of tests and this and that where machines are surpassing the Turing threshold. But is it really, a conscious machine, or is it what you could call a feed-forward zombie, where you're just using the outputs to simulate, but then Turing's question, of course, was, does that make any difference, and does it make it any less, intelligent? But there's a lot of intelligence, or AI is something like the idea of being, of having a sense of self is something that, cats, anything, if you look at them, you see, the thing in the mirror, you have the sense of self. They had, this past year, they have some machines and robots, they're saying that they actually do have the requirement sense of self. The idea that you're not going to, intelligence as it's manifested in humans is something that we share with a lot of animals, and I think it's something that we share in bits and pieces with a lot of machine intelligences already. So it's not going to be like one thing where you suddenly have this AI that comes out like the superhuman. It's going to be bits and pieces, all over the place. You could have an AI that would pass the Turing test that would have no sense of self. You could have these hybrid things happening that wouldn't happen in the animal world, but so that I think we've already surpassed the threshold in bits and pieces. And as I said in the book, I do think that we are only going to understand things like consciousness when we actually start to build conscious machines, just the same way that we only really understood flying when we started to build flying machines. Humans are very we're builders, and we build things with our hands, and we understand them once we build them. And I think that's what's going to happen. And I think it's already happened, and I think it's just going to accelerate in the next 20 years.
And like you said earlier, that the autonomous corporations are probably the scariest part. I think, like you said, we all have some sort of integration with AI on a daily basis. People talk to Siri on their phone, and there's all these kind of gradual iterations of it. But you kind of pulled the cover back on this this kind of insidious thing that's all around us, that people are not looking at that aspect of it, and that these corporations are just play by their own rules. That was super scary for me. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, well, I went to, interestingly, right in my city, in Montreal, we have the first Bitcoin, again, not university, but they have like a building that's devoted to Bitcoin, and they actually do classes and seminars. They're working a lot on the legal aspect of it. And so there's a bunch of people over there that are very busy. And so I sat in on a lot of these seminars. A lot of it's legal, like they're setting up using the blockchain. Bitcoin itself, it can be regarded, as I described in the book, as first. It basically has shareholders, which is everybody that buys, Bitcoin. But it keeps going by itself. It's a piece of machine code that's distributed, operate on the net, but it doesn't need any human involvement, any longer. It has humans that it interacts with, but as a corporation, it's building value, and I think it's already worth $8 billion, I think. So, go and look at other corporations that have a market cap of $8 billion. They're usually pretty big organizations, but this is a completely autonomous thing operating on the net, interacting with human beings. It's right under your noses, and it's already happening. And so they're actually expanding this concept into digital autonomous corporations. There's already a slew of them on the net. But you be able to do things like currencies, but also stock exchanges, but also just about anything else. So it is scary. It's happening. The interesting part is, how do you shut these things down? Like, how would you even shut down Bitcoin if you wanted to? Like, it's not an obvious question. And it's interacting with humans, and you might not like all the interactions and things that it is doing with humans, but would you even foreseeably be able to shut it down? Like it's just completely decentralized, operating with these people. Some people want to shut it down, or governments. I don't think you even could.
Right. Uh, when you start to plan a book like Darknet, how much research goes into it? And I would assume this is a book that you probably fairly heavily outlined. What is your writing process like for a thriller that's this tense and has so many details and a intricate plot that has to be woven together?
Yeah, it takes me, usually books like that I have floating around in the back of my head for, any number of years. And then I kind of, like I've got a list now of about 8 books that I want to write. And so I sort of keep, advancing the plots, in my head, just sort of daydreaming and scribbling things down. And I have a file folder that I keep. And then every time I see something that has something to do with that over a space of year or two, whatever, I just sort of keep adding to the file folder and writing in notes and whatever. Then when it actually comes time to write it, I sort of open up that and then sort of expand on it and actually do research. And then nowadays, because I'm a full-time writer, I will go and contact people. So I contacted people working in hedge funds, and I contacted, people, like I went to Bitcoin seminars and talked about to real people that were setting up distributed autonomous corporations. And so and then I take all that research and then try to wrap it into, a thriller type structure, which is challenging. But I mean, part of my books are to have like a fun escapist sort of read, but the other half of it is to educate about something current that people probably didn't entirely know about. So I'm trying to, so it's kind of when I'm writing a book now, I try to be able to do the writing of the book actually in less than 3 months. But I'll spend 3 months sort of plotting, 2 or 3 months plotting, and then another 2 months editing afterward.
And one thing I love about your books is you're absolutely right. You put in some really heavy and really dense information, but at the same time you write really believable and likable characters. And I had Andy Weir on the show a couple weeks ago talking about The Martian, and there's tons and tons of science in that book, but his character is really likable and believable, and it really carries that story. And at the end of the book, you've learned an awful lot without really feeling like you've been to science class. Do you make a conscious effort when you're shaping your characters, and do you have certain aspects about them in mind when you're also dreaming up this intricate plot?
Yeah, I mean, I try. As I'm kind of the premise-driven science fiction writer, so I have to say I'm much weaker on the character side. I kind of struggle. Although I mean, I think I'm okay on that. Like I think I'm very good on the premise-driven science fiction part. As good as anybody, but the character side I have that's more of a writing thing, and that's something I have a bit more trouble with. But I do, I try to make interesting characters and give them weaknesses and have them grow through the story. Sometimes you can have the character remain static and just face a lot of challenges, like sort of. In The Martian, I think his character, well, I guess he grows during it, but I mean, he faces all of the challenges and he goes through all that, and his world is changing around him. Or you can actually have the characters kind of change. I try to have the characters change, a little bit, and you try to make them relatable, but also make them have some kind of problems that people can relate to. And yeah, that's always a big challenge.
Well, and in the Nomad especially, in the opening chapters of that book, I really engaged with the characters, and that's what grabbed me in the beginning. And I knew, I'd kind of seen the trailer and knew what to expect from the book, in a way. But I was really engaged with the story. Tell me about Nomad. Where did that idea come from?
Well, Nomad I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but I was always fascinated with, black holes and, um, growing up in the kind of the 70s, when I was, a young kid, young child, that whole thing was just, and also, with the space at that time, if you were 6 or 7 years old and you were, they just, basically just landed on the moon. They were still putting up rockets, and like it was completely, I wanted to be an astronaut, back then, not a fireman, and so.
I think we
All
all
of that
did.
stuff was really starting back then, really peering into space and the Voyager programs and all that stuff. So, I mean, I always had a fascination with it. And when at one point I was reading through and actually I went and looked on a Wikipedia page. I remember specifically I looked at all of the things people have done with black holes in science fiction, and nobody had ever written a book where we had like a sort of a close but not totally disastrous encounter. But I said, well, that's pretty interesting. So I said, I'm going to write a book about that. So that's really where but once I did that, I said, well, now we need to make it big enough to be exciting, but also not so big that it would be kill absolutely everybody, because then there wouldn't be any story left. So I actually went out at that point, and I contacted. I have a pretty big beta reading email list, like 1,000 people of all stripes and jobs, and one of the things I actually did was I went out and I emailed all of my beta readers. You go and what do you do for work, or what are your hobbies? What do you know about? So I've got this huge database of everybody from pilots to astronomers to whatever, and so I can email them and go, hey, I need help with somebody that knows about black holes, and people will put me in touch. And I actually ended up getting in touch with like Dr. Seth Shostak, who's the director of SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence.
Yeah.
A couple of guys, research fellows at CERN, and a guy at the Keck Observatory. And I just had open discussions with them about the astrophysics of the encounter I was describing. And then I found a group of grad students that actually built a full 3D model of the solar system. Like, it's called an N-body simulation. And then I started lobbing these giant black holes through it and watching the planets like scatter basically, until I came up with just this. And obviously it's a little bit of a little bit of a perfect scenario, but where I could have something just absolutely so massive that at first blush every astrophysicist would tell you that an encounter with something of this size would be just completely disastrous, but if you tweak the parameters just right, you can have a situation where the situation leaves the Earth, and while it will be largely destroyed, still habitable. And so I spent a lot of time actually doing that, and then getting these grad students to build me the simulation, then running the simulations, and then coming up, and we even did climate modeling of the Earth and everything, and at the end of that, I came up with my scenario. And once I came up with the sort of physical scenario, then I decided to write a story, around that, and write a trilogy around that, actually. So that was a pretty big journey, actually. It took a remarkable amount of time to make all that actually work before I started writing the book.
I can imagine. And is that the software that you are showing off in the secret video that is only linked in the book?
It's not that secret. It's on my YouTube channel.
Okay. Well, I felt like I was, on the inside when I found the video.
It's sort of, one of the things we do in security is security by obfuscation, which is just something is there, but you just don't tell anybody it's there. And so,
right.
It's on my YouTube channel. I only tell people about it at the end of the book, because some of the information I've given you is kind of a spoiler, but I don't think it would ruin it if somebody wanted to read the book.
Yeah, absolutely not. You have this uncanny ability to publish books right when these topics seem to kind of come to the fore. With New Horizons and the probe that just passed Pluto, I guess a month or 6 weeks ago. Have you noticed that kind of the people's attention is peaked again towards space exploration, kind of caring about what's out there again. I know when, like you said, when I was a little kid growing up in the 70s, and you had all the space exploration, plus we had Star Wars, and all of this stuff. There just seemed to be this giddiness, about it that we kind of lost over the last couple of decades. But I wonder if some of that's coming back.
Well, I think it is. I mean, I think, Andy's book, The Martian, is the one that highlights that more than anything else. It's been number one bestseller on New York Times and globally for I don't know how long. I can't even imagine how many copies he must have sold of that thing. And that's a highly technical discussion of surviving on Mars. And so I think
right,
people's obviously in the world out there seems to be renewed interest in space exploration and with New Horizons and so I do think there is starting to be it's starting to become possible. You have people like Elon Musk who wants to die on Mars and when he says it, I mean, not that he wants to die on Mars, but he wants to go and build a colony or whatever. But when somebody like him says it, I have a feeling people start to believe, that this will actually happen. And so I do think there's been kind of a shift back towards thinking about that stuff. And when I was writing Nomad, and it's partly fortuitous, when I was in the middle of writing Nomad, actually, some researchers came out and said that 70,000 years ago, they found out that Schultz's star, which is a red dwarf, actually passed about a half light year from our solar system. They did that up on number crunching. They've got enough, like with all the devices and things you've got looking out into space now. They're looking at space as not just a static thing, but as things, stars, and everything is moving around. And so, Alpha Centauri is about 4 light years away. And when I was when I was a kid and you looked into this, you think, oh, that's the closest star, but that's not the end of the story. So now they're saying 70,000 years ago, Schultz's star passed a half light year. And now they're looking at, I think 1 million years from now, there's going to be a star 2.5 times the mass of our sun, which is going to come within, a billion years ago. Anyway, I got it all written down, but a million years ago, there's a sun 2.5 times the mass of our sun, which came 1/10 of a light year away. And in another million years, there's going to be a small dwarf star that's going to come 100th of a light year away, which will literally brush, the planets. And it's Sedna, the 10th planetoid, the one sort of the biggest one after Pluto. They're saying now it isn't even a planetoid of our sun. It was actually captured from a passing star when our star system collided with another star system sometime in the far past. And now there's all kinds of, as I'm reading this, and I have this in the footnotes, 35 million years ago, there was a massive ice age that was started on the Earth. And they're saying now that the reason was because the Earth's orbit shifted slightly, and it could have been, the influence of. So passing stars are not just once every billion years, but every million years we have a star that comes close enough, through the Oort cloud, disturbs the comets, even, disturbs the orbits of the planet. So we're constantly mixing with the interstellar environment. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And that's something I highlighted in Nomad. And that's very new scientific knowledge, I guess.
And realizing that our world and our universe is constantly in a state of flux is great fodder for fiction writers. Because the limitation, I mean, there are no limitations to the possibilities you can dream up.
Well, it is interesting, when I first studied this stuff, people talk about panspermia, the idea that that life did not start on Earth, go somewhere else and floating through space, but it always seemed kind of far-fetched, from something you get from this star system to another. But now that I've done research and people have started to understand how often other star systems are sort of colliding with ours, it's like, every million years we have another star that's sort of sweeping through our star system, and which is, if you put that onto a scale of 1 billion years, that means you're going to have 1 million stars that are going to be sweeping through ours, over space. So now it starts to seem like, wait a minute, all the stars and star systems are literally intermixing with each other. So, if life did start on one of them out there, it seems inevitable to me now that it does, it just all sort of, just hops from one to the other. Obviously, it needs to start somewhere, and that's a different discussion. But yeah, I mean, it's it just seems. I mean, we're going a bit off topic, but I mean, we're talking about life. I think another thing that's going to happen soon is we're going to discover, life somewhere else. Whether it'll be in Enceladus or some other non-carbon thing on Titan, or some radio signals from somewhere else. I've got my own theories, and I've got some books I want to write about that stuff too. But it's an interesting time.
Yeah, and nothing is off topic, because everything plays into our sense of creativity and what makes writers tick, and you never know where that spark of inspiration comes from. I have been in the oddest situations, and a story idea pops in my head from either something I observed or something I read that then just fired up into something completely, off the wall. And so you never know, and that's a great lesson for writers, to always be paying attention, and to not limit yourself to where ideas come from.
Oh yeah, I read. I read periodicals like Nature, New Scientist, and The Economist are three that I read all the time. I just scan through them and just see if anything pokes out at me. Wouldn't that be interesting to write about? And that's where the seeds of all my ideas come from. Is just every week I read the science and the business periodicals, and just sort of let it filter through my consciousness until things sort of pop out that could be interesting to write about.
And if we do discover life of some sort somewhere else, I think science fiction will take a huge leap forward. I think stories will start coming out of everywhere. I
think science fiction writers and probably scientists have already come to the conclusion that life is pretty much everywhere. So it'll be like one of those. It would be like when Edward Snowden, revealed that the U.S. government was spying on everybody. It should have been this amazing revelation. Everybody's like, yeah, we knew.
Right. It's
okay,
when
we've actually found out that it's true, but we kind of already knew, so it's not like a surprise. I think finding life somewhere else, people are going to be like, this is amazing, but most people are going to be like, yeah, we kind of knew it had to be anyway. So yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the folks that were the most upset about Edward Snowden were the folks that just didn't want to admit that they already knew it. But
yeah, and then the guys who were in charge of the programs who had egg on their face. But for the rank and file, I think you're like, yeah, we kind of already knew you were doing that, so whatever. Yeah.
Right. You said Nomad is going to be a trilogy?
Yeah. Well, I actually, and so I spent a lot of time on this simulation. And so I had this close brush by with this massive object that literally rockets through the solar system, and so Mars and Venus get shot off. These gravitational slingshot effects shoots Mars and Venus, and Venus and Mercury. Sorry, Mars gets thrown into this really highly elliptic orbit. But what's interesting actually is that Saturn gets pulled into a retrograde orbit, so it actually gets pulled into an orbit that's the opposite direction that it was orbiting before. And exactly 19 months after the events in the original Nomad book, Earth has if not a collision, an extremely close call, or a collision with Saturn. And so when I actually saw that in the simulation, I thought, well, this is interesting. So I have the people survive there's a few intrepid people that manage to survive the initial encounter, but then at the end of book one, they say they run the simulations themselves because their father was an astrophysicist, one of the main characters, and then they look and they go, well, we survived this, but in 19 months we're going to collide with Saturn. So, yeah. So that I said, well, I may as well write a trilogy and just see what happens when Saturn comes.
You might as well just take these characters and put them through all sorts of hell since you.
Yeah, well, the Earth really gets messed up in the process, and then So. And of course, there's a secret cabal that's involved somewhere. Won't spoil too much for anybody.
So how do you go about planning out a trilogy like that? You've got you start looking at the possibilities. Did you envision Nomad as a self-contained story, and then say, well, there's another story to be told here, or do you begin and say, I'm going to take these characters to this point? and then the next point of the journey is going to be this book. I think that's a question a lot of writers have is when they're how do you take what could be a massive story and find natural breaking points, which could be book 1, 2, and 3, or how do you decide to try to wrap up all of those scenarios into the same cover?
Yeah, I don't like, I don't like the idea of just stopping a book in the middle and then making it a cliffhanger into the next one.
Right.
So Nomad is like a self-contained book, and I could stop the series there, and it would be a self-contained thing that be perfectly, that it would be perfectly done. But partly because of the simulation, when I saw Saturn coming around, I said, well, let's see what they do, with that. So that sort of lent itself into the trilogy, and then it felt like I could write a trilogy out of it. It was I spent a lot of time building that world up, like the science behind it, and so I sort of thought, well, after spending that much time invested in building the world, and I was hoping that it would become successful, which it seems to have, or seems to be becoming. Why not expand that into a trilogy and use the same characters? Yeah. And I did actually. There's a scenario in Nomad that is a little melodramatic, a little bit more on the melodrama side than I would have normally used. But I actually, in book 2, I explain why it ends up. So I explain kind of some of the events in book 1 and book 2. So I have a little bit of fun with that too. So
Nice.
the reader gets to find out. There's some things that happen that seem beyond the realm of just being chance, and you find out that actually it's not, that this is actually being, there's some people pulling the strings in the background for these very random occurrences that seem to come together. So yeah, so that sort of lends itself into making into a trilogy.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned a little bit ago that you have this massive list of beta readers. That is awesome. I know lots of writers that have several beta readers that they'll bounce ideas off of, but I think you probably have the most elaborate list. And is that something? First off, how did you cultivate a list that big of beta readers, and how do you acquire those people that you can bounce ideas off of, or get, your science right, or things like that? How do you begin to build that trusted list of folks?
Yeah, it's a challenge when you're starting out. When I very first started out, I actually, and I think I did a blog posting called the Shakespeare System. It was like where I used every letter of Shakespeare's name to map out an activity you could do as a starting out writer. One of the items in there was using Craigslist. And so when I started out, I had nobody that wanted to read my books, except friends and family, and they didn't really want to. They were just forced them to. So I actually went on Craigslist and I posted, you're in a general section saying, I will pay you $25 to read my novel and give me honest feedback, just because you need these people on the outside. So I think I paid basically to get about 10 to 20 people on the out, that they were completely arm's length from me to read and provide feedback. And then they, and my writing was good enough at that point that they, got excited, and they were kind of, the people that decided to do this were all kind of science fiction-y sort of people anyway. They had an interest in it, and it just developed from there. So actually, some of those original people that I got in touch with have stayed with me for the last, 3 or 4 years. And when I put a book out, I put a special thing, at the front of the book saying, if you want to be a beta reader, email me. Here's, a description of what it is that I'm looking for. And I had literally over 3 years, I've had a couple hundred people sign up. I think my beta list is 800 now, and now I've capped it because I don't. So I've got like an advanced reading list and a sort of newsletter list that's I don't know, well into the thousands now. But my beta reader list is sort of my core group of people is about 800, which is still a lot. But I've sort of focused on that group and ask them, what they do for work and all, and built a database out of that. So it's really helpful when when I have a character that wants to fly an airplane, although actually I did take my pilot course this year, so now I can do that myself. But, in Darknet, it was before I took my piloting course. And, I've got a couple of airline pilots, so I emailed them and they're very happy. Say like, okay, when I'm starting up an airplane, what do you got to do? What do you got to check? Where do things go through your head? And so it was really, it's really helpful to have those people to talk to add that realism to it.
No doubt. And you mentioned that you have a large list of advanced readers as well. Both of your Darknet and Nomad both are doing tremendously well on the Amazon charts. And would you like to speak a little bit about how you mobilize your group of people to help you to make a big splash when you launch a book, so that you ensure that that you have a good launch and that you get good placement in the algorithms and all that good stuff? Is there a way that you keep your group excited for what's going on and then get them to help you spread the word and get reviews in and all that good stuff?
Yeah, it's there's different theories on that depending on who you talk to.
Sure.
Hugh Howey kind of is like the sort of the very low sell. And Jerry Riddle and myself, I think we come from an internet marketing background, and I think try to, collecting email lists. I think there's a view also too that like the book market and electronic media is changing very rapidly, and I think keeping in touch directly with readers is the only way to really guarantee that you'll be able to keep on doing what you're doing, because you don't really know, Amazon could change its policy. I love Amazon. Amazon actually has been fantastic with me, great customer service and everything else. But at some point, the corporate whatever might decide to change their mind and change the terms, and that sort of leaves you out in the cold. And so I think it's important to build that personal network with your readers, as much as possible in any way that you can think of. Because I just think that that's really important. So how do I mobilize them? When I did Darknet, I put it on pre-release, and I tried to do the slow burn leading up to it, and then had the release of it. And the release was very quiet. It got into the top 20 in its categories, but it's gradually built itself up to where it's, in the top 4 or 5, and it's tech thrillers or whatever, 6 months later. And that's a way to do it. With Nomad, I took the opposite approach, and I didn't tell anybody it was coming out. And literally, I put the book up on Wednesday night. On Thursday night, it went live, and then I had a small group of 40 or 50 beta readers, small for me anyway. And I said, could you, they'd read it, said, could you go put an honest review up on it today? And then I put out press releases on Friday and Saturday. I dropped the price down and emailed my full list. And that has much more of a bang effect. So Nomad ended up jumping right up into number 1 in its categories in one day, which I find is the way I think probably works better. But a lot of other writers do kind of the slow burn approach, and that works well. It takes time. So those are the two ways. I think I prefer the sort of the very quick. The doing it quickly, and Jerry Riddle did that as well when he did Departure. He literally unleashed it in 2 days from when he put it on to when he told his followers about it. And I think that gives the best bang for the buck, with the algorithms and stuff, at least in my opinion. But yeah, everybody's got a different opinion.
Well, sure, and there are as many ways of doing it as there are writers. But that. I do like the excitement that builds, and when I saw your book come out, I started wondering, what is Nomad? Where did that come from? And it completely caught me by surprise, and I'm sure it did everyone else. And I immediately went and bought it on my Kindle, I guess like everybody else did, because it it went to the top of the charts,
Yeah.
But that's that kind of that guerrilla, publishing is kind of awesome, and is really a breath of fresh air in this time where we have so many books coming out and people, building and building and building. My book comes out in 4 months. Get excited about it and stay excited for 4 months.
Yeah, I tried that, and I just, yeah, I prefer to keep it under wraps and keep it secret, and then when it's ready to go, then just go all guns blazing, and yeah, and I spend a lot of time talking to people. The last week and a half, I probably spent 2 hours a day emailing me, thanking me for the book or talking about stuff. And so it's a lot of, keeping in touch with people.
Yeah.
A lot of that. But it's worth it. I like the quick bang kind of thing. It seems to work better.
And it adds to your author mystique. What is he working on that he's not telling us about?
I got lots of stuff coming. I wish I could write faster. I need copies of myself.
I know the feeling. Did I see on Facebook a while back that you're working on the next Atopia book?
Yeah. I'm struggling with that a little bit. It's just that was actually my very first book.
Right.
And I wrote Dystopia, and Atopia wasn't at the time really designed as a trilogy, although I decided to kind of take that stab as a science fiction kind of world. And I do have a sort of the outline for that book, but that world is so complicated. Like even when I write it, my brain has to almost melt because it's happening in it's virtual realities and alternate universes and whatever, and trying to make it all stick to its internal logic and technology is slightly mind numbing. I would love to open that up as a Kindle world and just see what would happen because it's just the technology inside of it is so like mind blowing. I know a lot of people have done singularity virtual reality stuff, but I spent the beginning of my career working and building actual virtual reality companies. I was sort of a pioneer in that space, so writing about that stuff is near and dear to my heart. But yeah, I'm struggling with that with the Utopia, which would be the third series in that book. I've got the plot for it, but I'm struggling with that one. I don't know if I'm going to do that next or if I've just plotted it out. I might put it on a back burner and see if get some other stuff out. There's some other stuff with a much bigger bang for the buck that I think people would have more fun with. Whereas Utopia is sort of like my personal life project. It's a pretty big scope kind of thing. So, yeah.
I love that a book about a rampant black hole and Saturn going into retrograde is not as complicated as Utopia will be.
It's not. This is a cakewalk.
Is there any new news about the Cyberstorm film?
No, there isn't. It's still under. They don't really tell you anything.
Right.
I can't complain because they pay you money, and then they go away and they do whatever they do. I've seen quite a few movies announced, with Ready Player One, obviously Andy's movie The Martian, and I think Wool is kind of coming in and out, but there's been a few other ones of anyway, there's been a few other ones and whatever. They're coming along. Cyberstorm, I don't know. It was a hot topic, the cyber attack, whatever. I think I don't know. Anyway, I don't know anything about it, so we'll see.
Okay.
I'm waffling. I have no idea.
Well, that's fine. Matthew, where can people connect with you? What is your website where they can sign up to be on your mailing list so that they can find out when new projects are coming?
Well, you can go on my website, so MatthewMather.com, MATHEWMATHER.com, or just find me on Facebook. If you just go onto Google and search for author Matthew Mather, I think my Facebook and my website will pop up, and then my Amazon page. So you can find me in any of those ways, or just search for Darknet or Nomad on Amazon itself.
Awesome. Matthew, thank you so much for taking time out to come back on the show, and I'm Absolutely love Nomad. I read it in just a couple days when it came out, and looking forward to your follow-up to it and everything else you've got coming out. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Hank. And thank you for having me back on. And it was great talking.